Today is May 1st, 2024. This is episode 76 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Today, Joe and I will go over some of the rumblings here. Late in the transfer portal, it officially closed today. We had some big names enter late, and then a couple of teams that are starting to shape up and look pretty good for next season. So, Joe, as John Rothstein says, we can sleep in May. It's May. Everybody that wants to find somewhere else to play next year has done so already. But the content's really not going to stop the, you get a ton of big transfer news this late in the year. We had a couple of players announce that they're returning in the last couple of days. But first, Joe, let's start with some big names late in the portal. You said you thought there'd be more than a few than I did. And some big names certainly going. We'll start with Kadary Richmond from Seton Hall, the Big East first team all-conference player. It was rumored basically all year that he wanted to go in the transfer portal, and a little bit of a shock that he didn't once the Pirates season ended. But he enters with just a couple of days before the portal closes, and his destination, Joe, is all but confirmed. Thoughts on Kadary leaving Seton Hall for likely a conference rival?
I'm pretty shocked, Sean. I thought he had his most efficient year, and no one really knew. Was there writing on the wall for this, at least in Big East circles?
There's some rumors coming out after the fact of, he had a kind of interesting couple game absence earlier this year, and there are rumors around that he wasn't too happy with an NIL payment that he got. But because Shaheen was kind of like, he's sore. And people were like, what? Like, that's not a good enough. That's not the reason why he's not playing. But, people did think he was going to transfer, and they were shocked that it kind of took this long to enter the portal, which means that maybe all that was false and that something else came up. But very confusing.
Yeah, and Sean, him entering now, I think is, in terms of portal rankings, where would he have been on this list had he entered probably a few weeks ago? He'd probably be top 3, I'd say. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, he was number 2 in Evan Miyakawa's transfer portal rankings, only behind Umar Ballo. But it doesn't really matter where Kadary goes. I think he could walk into any college team in the country and start. He's that good. He's that much of a dog. And he's probably going to be drafted in the NBA next year if that's where he chooses to go.
Yeah, Sean. And for all those who don't know, do you want to reveal the crystal ball?
Yeah, Joe. It's not too far of a drive. It is up to Slick Rick in Queens.
Not even
St.
a drive. He
John's.
can take the train. He can do it in a whole bunch of different options, Sean. It's pretty funny because in Midwest circles, a lot of people thought Arkansas did have a chance here. Certainly Kentucky entered the fray, as probably Michigan and anyone. Ohio State wouldn't shock me. He was probably contacted by every major program in the country, but for him to perhaps jump ship to St. John's, I really don't know. I understand St. John's has the flat top fund and they have a lot more excitement in the program, but I don't think it's anything monumental at this stage. I mean, it is only year 2 of Rick. Certainly momentum picked up toward the end from February to March, but for a Seton Hall guy to enter the portal like this, you would assume for him to go to Kentucky and Arkansas and Indiana, not just go up to St. John's. But in terms of his development, I can't argue that Rick couldn't help him. However, I really don't. This is just another one, Sean, that it just screams NIL and bag.
It's one of those fifth-year players, Joe, where, hey, where's the development going to go from here? I mean, he's already a killer. He's not a great shooter. He's he's played for Jim Boeheim at Syracuse before he went to Seton Hall, where he played for Kevin Willard, and then Willard goes to Maryland. Then he plays for Shaheen Holloway. Development-wise, I don't think that there's much else. Like, a lot of these fifth-year seniors have kind of hit, where they're going to be as college players, and it's just a bag-off. It looked like Seton Hall does not have great NIL, at least compared to their Big East rivals, and it's a big hole in their team. They got some good commits in there, but it will be a tough one. We will be getting to the season recap video for Seton Hall sometime in the future. We're pre-recording those, so, we may be talking. It might be 3 or 4 weeks down the line, but that will be one that we'll get to. And staying on what was a pretty good season for the Pirates. Now, we've got 2 names here, Joe, that were in the portal that are likely going to be in the NBA draft and stay in the NBA draft and are only doing this as, contingency options if they tear their ACL in the combine or something like that. That's Coleman Hawkins and Trayvon Brazil. 2 pretty similar players. Anything to say here about whether they'll actually end up breaking glass in case of emergency?
I don't think so, Sean. I think Coleman Hawkins, from everything in Midwest circles and in Big Ten, especially Big Ten and Illini circles, indicates that he doesn't want to sour any relation with Illinois by going anywhere in the Big Ten. So I think that's a slight sigh of relief. I think the biggest sigh of relief for some Illini fans is that he does intend to go pro. He might just test the market to see if there's some ridiculous offer out there, but I think at this stage, those have since passed, and I say that hesitantly because if he does take this to the 11th hour toward the end of May and he's still not confident in his draft stock, maybe someone drops something. But other than that, Sean, I really haven't heard anything indicating that he's seriously considering any school, especially any in the Big Ten.
Yeah, he even tweeted, or he put out a statement on Twitter after, basically telling everybody to chill and that he's definitely going to the NBA and only, entering the transfer portal because it was the last day and in case something, really awful happens in workouts or something like that. But there's a couple other names here, Joe. Kaluma likely doing the same thing, the former Creighton and Kansas State player. And we've got another name, Big Ten diehards will know this name, maybe not the national fans because he wasn't on a very good team, but that's Cam Christie from Minnesota, younger brother of Michigan State's Max Christie. Cam Christie had an amazing year for the Golden Gophers. They returned Dawson Garcia. They returned some of their pieces. They lose Elijah Hawkins in the portal late. They lose Christie in the portal late. This is a pretty big blow for Ben Johnson and the Golden Gophers.
I think losing Hawkins was probably the most catastrophic thing. And then losing Christie was just probably a bomb after the apocalypse, if I could even make an analogy like that, Sean. If 10 people survived the apocalypse, the last thing to go off destroyed everyone. So I really don't know. He's been listed as a do not contact. He is primarily going to focus on NBA draft process, but you know what that means, guys. He's going to get contacted by a lot of people. Who do you think has a shot here, Sean?
Oh, this was kind of one of the later ones. I haven't really seen a list. I can check to see if one's been updated, but this is I think he is leaving a return to Minnesota open. There's another Big Ten team that we'll talk about later, Joe, that might be able to use him. But then after that, Cam Christie as a freshman was a really good player. Basically any team could use someone like him to guard. He's able to make some shots. He's bigger. He's able to defend. He really kind of came out of nowhere, unless you were a Minnesota fan this year, to be one of the better freshmen in the conference. Now, that wasn't such a high bar to clear, but still, he made a bigger impact than most people thought he would, and looks like that he will be likely doing that somewhere else in year 2, but this is a tough blow. I think Carolina you could look out for. They have a couple open scholarships. And then there's the other Big Ten team that we'll go to now, Joe. We talked about them earlier a little bit with Coleman. But Illinois, a lot of turnover for Brad Underwood and the Fighting Illini. They have just 2 scholarship players returning. That's Ty Rogers and Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn. They do have some commitments from some pretty solid transfers in Kylan Boswell from Arizona, Trey White from Louisville, and Ben Humrichis from Evansville. Where are you at with Illinois? Pretty solid year. They get to that Sweet 16, and almost nobody from that is going to be back next year.
Well, Sean, I just want to make clear before the Illini fans jump at you. You just made the Elite Eight, but the biggest thing I will say, Sean, is I think they got to temper expectations off that Elite Eight. I think no one is going to be at Underwood's throat at all if they're step down from last year, but I think it could be a very big step down. I think Jeff Goodman temper their expectations, which was, get into the tourney and perhaps win a game. I think it's just get into the tourney at this stage, Sean. The way teams in the Big Ten have reloaded, and I'm not saying the Big Ten's going to have like 9, 10 really good teams. I think you might have 5 or 6 tournament like locks, then 2 or 3 bubble teams. Illinois might fall into that bubble team range for the first time in a while, Sean. Uh, if I'm correct, yeah, every year under Underwood, following the COVID season, they've been a lock for the tourney the past 3 seasons now. Yeah, 24, 23, 22, 21. Yeah, no, the last 4 seasons they've been locked. So they might have to get familiar with the bubble again, Sean. I don't think it's anything that's an indictment upon him, but I do think getting a Cam Christie, uh, probably the last remaining really good piece of the portal, Janelle Davis, who we're going to talk about in a second, being off it. Probably the best guard out there, especially when you consider the eligibility. I really think it is. So I think they're going to make him a priority, especially after missing out on AJ Store the way they did.
Yeah, it certainly looked like Store was headed there, and rumors of some in-season tampering happening, but they ended up not getting him. So clearly, whatever they did didn't work. But I think you got some solid players, but you lose a couple of your role players to you lose Shannon to the draft and Coleman to graduation/draft, and then Goody to Indiana and Danger to Memphis, and all these things kind of stacking up on each other. While 1 or 2 of them might have been okay, you're kind of building an entire new rotation here. Now, none of these players have really ever been the guy, and that's something that Illinois never lacked in the past, whether it was Io or Kofi or Terrence Shannon. They have always had one of the guys that you want to have the ball at the end of the game, but it looks like somebody might have to step into that role next year. They have quite a few scholarships left, Joe, so by no means are they done, but going to look a little different for the orange and blue next year. One more Big Ten team before we get into 2 of the bigger name programs. Michigan, you finally get your commitment from Vlad Golden. That leaves you with, I think, 2 spots left, or 3.
1, Sean. So as of it, keep by, guys. We're recording this May 1st. So Nabari Burnett confirmed he was staying. So Jace Howard, surprisingly, is staying to the anger of some, but not to the shock of people close to the program. There's 1 spot remaining with George Washington retransferring out. So pretty unclear what they're going to do with this. It's not just me who's unclear. I don't think Michigan knows what they're going to do. I think they wanted to go all in on an Aiden Mahaney, Liam McNeely, both of which were UConn. UConn came in, and then those recruitments were all but over. Are they going to go after Akani Roos, the 4 or 5-star freshman we've talked about in the past, or are they just going to be a wait-and-see opportunity? I do think a Cam Christie would be the perfect piece on this team. I think, maybe you need a 3, perhaps more so than a guy like Cam Christie or a guy who can play 3-4. Someone 6'6", 6'7", like a Kadari Richmond would be perfect. But right now, Sean, I think Michigan's clearly in a better spot than before, but I think they're 1 piece away from being a Big Ten contender. I certainly think with the roster they have now, the expectation should be to get into the tournament, perhaps even win a game. I don't think that's too unrealistic with the roster they have.
Yeah, no, I think we talked about it last time. If Nelly Davis had gone there, I think you're putting them in the top 5 in the Big Ten next year. And now we'll see how the freshmen, how those bench players work out. But a lot of coaches do like to leave 1 scholarship open in case, so they can sign some extra freshmen for the next year. Next year will be the first year without COVID players. So high school recruiting might be making sort of a little bit of a comeback. We'll see if Dusty decides to do that. But, yeah, I think Michigan is done unless, they're okay if they're done. And if something breaks and they can get somebody else in the door, I think it has to be like a starter quality player because they don't need any more solid bench pieces because they've got a couple of them. But you talked about UConn. They get Mahaney. They get Liam McNeely. They're going to be really good again. They're still waiting for Alex Caravan to decide whether he's coming back or going to the NBA. Pretty sure he's leaning towards staying, but you never know. And then we've got two more teams that we want to talk about here today. Joe, a little bit of a shorter episode, but we've got the Wildcats of Kentucky here. Mark Pope's Kentucky Wildcats. They have been putting in some work in the transfer portal, Joe. They have gotten a ton of good commitments. We talked about a couple of them last time, I think, but there's four really main ones that I want to talk about. They get Kobe Brea from Dayton, basically competing against everybody in the sport because he was the best three-point shooter in the country. They get Kirk Risa from West Virginia, but more notably from Arizona. They get Otega Owe from Oklahoma, and they get Andrew Carr from Wake Forest. So, Joe, which one of these four do you like the best? And where are you putting Kentucky at this point?
I actually like Kirk Risa the best, and I think that could be a little biased, just based on what we saw in Arizona. But I think mixing his experience in, and a guy who's been all around the country once, who's got Pac-12, Big 12, SEC, the guy just plays basketball. He knows exactly what's going on. I think an underrated one shot. I don't know if we touched on Lamont Butler last week. We couldn't have because those.
Yeah, but Lamont Butler also committed from San Diego State.
I think it's another great piece. Ultimately, shot. I don't know who's going to be the dude on this team. It could be a Kobe Brea, could be a Kirk Risa. Right now, though, they have a bunch of guys that can make shots. And Mark Pope is one of the elite offensive coaches in the sport, and it's pretty clear he prioritized shot making because all four of their top transfers are guys that could absolutely flame things, could absolutely catch fire from three, and guys who make free throws too. So I don't think Kentucky is going to be in these situations where they've been in the past, late in games, where the freshmen crumble. I think that's far in the past now with Calipari gone and Mark Pope in there, especially if they're going to prioritize the transfer portal the way they are.
Yeah, I think Kentucky's going to be really good at this point. I think they're definitely starting the year in the top 25. The key thing that you said, Joe, as well. This team, I think, is built for Mark Pope. The reason why, it's easier to be a good offensive coach when you have players who can make shots. And Mark Pope is an excellent offensive coach. And the age is the biggest difference here. You have Carr, who's a fifth-year senior, Krisa, who's a fifth-year senior, Amari Williams, who's a senior, Lamont Butler, who's a fifth-year senior. Those guys are not going to be scared of any environment that the SEC will throw at them, even, some of the best. So it's been a great couple weeks for Mark Pope in Kentucky, especially after being at such a disadvantage in the transfer portal, with many people already committed to their new schools by the time Pope had even been hired. Hard to see this going much better from day of hire for Mark Pope. But last one, Joe, as we wrap up a quick pod here, is the reason that Mark Pope was hired at Kentucky. That's John Calipari and Arkansas. He flips a couple of commits, most notably Boogie Fland, the guard from New York, and they get a couple of high-profile commitments. They get Jonas Idu from Tennessee, the star center, and then they get Janelle Davis from Florida Atlantic, like you said. Now, Calipari's a couple spots behind Mark Pope, but he is reaching for the stars, and he's coming down with a couple of them.
Yeah, Sean, and I want to note that if you look at the 247 transfer portal rankings, IU is clearly number one. Kansas not far behind at two. Kentucky and Kansas, you probably put interchange, tied for second. But fourth is Arkansas with 3 commits. They have Big Z, 3 transfer portal commits, that is. Big Z, Janelle, and I do. So, this could be a matter of maybe saving. I don't think Calipari's saving scholarships, but they're one more away shot for probably overtaking Kansas and Kentucky for second.
Yeah, no, certainly. They need to fill out their rotation, and they need to, they have plenty of scholarships to give, but still, those 4 players, Fland, Davis, Big Z, and Adu, you could put, an average SEC player in there with them, and that's a really good starting lineup. and then you get some of the other recruits coming in off the bench. Arkansas is going to be good next year, and starting to Calipari at least deserves some of the credit for recruiting at Kentucky, because he keeps saying like, this is Calipari U. Things are looking good for the Hogs too.
Yeah, and I think one major asterisk we could put on this is Janelle Davis does intend to go pro. I do not think he's going to get the feedback to go clearly the first round, but if he could get a two-way, perhaps he does leave and doesn't go to Arkansas. But if that all works out in Calipari's favor and he stays, I can't think of a better piece than a guy who went to a Final Four. And I want to credit Calipari too. The moment it was pretty noticed or pretty common knowledge in the basketball world that Janelle Davis was not going to get into Michigan, he swooped in. That recruitment, he entered, no one else did. The only names you heard floating around was Louisville early, but that was quickly shut down by some of Janelle Davis's FAU teammates. The rumor on the street is that Janelle was intending to follow Dusty to Michigan, especially for the fact Elijah Martin wasn't going to go there. But I don't think it was it might have been a graduation thing. Ultimately, only Janelle and Michigan admissions would know. It did not work out there. So Michigan prioritized Roddy Gale. And here we are on May 1st. Janelle Davis officially commits to Arkansas. So really opportunistic of Calipari. That's one thing, and I don't say that as an insult. John Calipari's always been an opportunistic recruiter, and I think in the transfer portal he's going to continue to do that. I think he see the benefits of it toward his latter years in Kentucky, and I think at Arkansas he's just going to emphasize that even more, because although he's an elite recruiter in Calipari ball, Calipari U, all that, it's harder to recruit at Arkansas than Kentucky. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to do that well. Clearly, he started off in a phenomenal way. But maybe the 1 or 2 5-stars you don't normally get, Phil does that with 1 or 2 transfers.
Yeah, no, it will be interesting to see if the Calipari shine wears off a little bit in a couple of years. Like, he is still the guy that you go to if you want to play in the NBA. If you watch the NBA playoffs yesterday, for example, you saw one of his players who was not a very high recruit score 48 points against the Knicks. That's Tyrese Maxey, and Devin Booker's on the Suns. There's dozens of NBA players that went to Calipari U. Even you go back to Derrick Rose when he was in Memphis. So until further notice, that is going to be the place that you want to go if you want to play in the NBA. Now, that might not be the best strategy for building a Final Four national championship team, but he's still done that before, even in the wave of all the freshmen that he's had to play. And there will be no fifth years. This upcoming year will be the last year of the fifth year, so then maybe his style comes back into play a little bit once the people that are our age, Joe, are in the workforce rather than
working the 9 to 5
rather than cashing the NIL checks. But that's all we have for you today. Thank you for tuning in to